Welcome to the Communicating Capital podcast, where finance and communication get a fresh perspective. Hosted by a team of dynamic women in the industry, we're here to redefine the conversation with candid, no-nonsense interviews featuring executives, communication experts, and industry leaders. With a focus on clarity and real-world impact, we make the world of finance easy, digestible, and relatable. So whether you're a seasoned professional or you're just interested in our world, we're here to navigate the space in new and exciting ways. So today, joining us from Connecticut is Cody Fletcher. Cody serves as a director at Orange Group. And if you've watched Yujia's episode, actually, you'll know that Orange Group is an IR firm dedicated exclusively to Bitcoin companies. With deep expertise in what happens behind the scenes in Bitcoin companies, he helps these organizations communicate their vision and navigate the complexities of the capital markets. Cody, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Hey, thanks, Jessica. Thanks for having me. This is great.
I'm so excited. So excited. And Cody, can you start by telling us a little bit about your background and what led you to work in IR for Bitcoin and for Bitcoin companies in particular?
Yeah, sure. I kind of want to give a story. I know we had Yujia on as well, but just kind of a story. It kind of all leads into how I'm in IR, but of how Yujia and I met. So I went to Virginia Tech. I first started off in financial planning, and I was recruited by a firm here in Connecticut, and living in West Hartford, which is where I am currently again. I was looking for a place to live, and I'm fresh out of college, just kind of hunting for a roommate in a pretty suburban town, and I found a posting on Craigslist. So I'm scouring Craigslist and saw that there was two finance guys working in accounting that needed a third roommate. And I reached out to him, didn't hear anything back. Reached out to him again, didn't hear anything back. And then I finally reached out to him a third time. And then he finally got back to me and said, yeah, come by and see the place. And that was Yujia.
No way. Yeah. Wait a second.
Yeah.
You've known him forever. Okay, sorry to interrupt you, but keep going. That's crazy.
No. Yeah, so it's a pretty cool story. We technically can say that. How'd you meet Yujia? Yeah, we met on Craigslist. But so I moved in with him, lived there for the year and a half. From there, I moved to the city, lived in Hoboken in New Jersey for quite some time, where I met my wife, and then kind of times a flat circle, full circle. I'm back in West Hartford now. In the last 4 years before I got into IR with Yujia, I was doing fractional CFO work. For a lot of different startups, all primarily e-com based. That work was fun. It was a lot of high stress, late hours, dealing with eccentric CEOs. And I was kind of explaining to Yujia this, probably not this February, but last February. And he was like, what do you know about IR? What do you know about corporate finance? And I was like, I know what I've learned so far. I love talking to people and spreading a good message and, storytelling. So he actually brought me on to Blue Shirt Group last year, which is where he was first. And then an IR firm, second biggest, I think, in the country. And then from there, we started his brainchild, Orange Group, this year. To get into Bitcoin, I kind of first got in 2017 when the first round of people were all getting in around 18K or so. And this thing was going up, and everybody's like, this is awesome. And then it wasn't awesome for quite some time. Right. And then the COVID crash happened. And then that's kind of when another good buddy of mine, Frankie, we kind of had a whiteboard session. And I decided, I was like, all right, we're all in here. We're going all in. And so COVID crash happened. I remember spending as much money as I could on Bitcoin and Ethereum.
I love that, especially after what happened this week.
Exactly.
Amazing.
So then we basically took that, ran with that bull market, which was fun. Obviously the lows of not taking enough profits and everything there. But, Bitcoin is just it. Once you learn it and once you kind of really understand it, I don't know if anyone will ever fully understand it, but it really is just such a attractive measure of value. Yuji and I are both Bitcoiners at heart. And just working in a space that can maximize our strengths and then also be able to be just passionate about the thing that we are both passionate the most about.
Right.
So, it just made a lot of sense. And, we started in January and we haven't stopped growing yet. So here we are.
That's so amazing. That's so amazing.
Cool.
I feel like investor relations for Bitcoin companies is, I mean, obviously, I feel like everyone might think this. It's very unique compared to other sectors. What are some of the biggest challenges you see when you're helping these Bitcoin companies communicate with their investors versus your other clients from years prior?
I think it's just kind of the narrative around Bitcoin. Before this last election, and even kind of before that, when the ETFs were approved, it's been the stigma around Bitcoin where, a lot of folks are even still caught up on like Silk Road, and it was the money used for, illicit transactions. But It takes a little studying to understand. But then once you get it, it clicks. There is no turning back. There really isn't. So it's just we're kind of in that phase of early internet adopters where, people were like, oh, the internet, that's not going to last, or that's not going to work. Then all of a sudden, 2 years later, like it's literally pretty much everyone, you don't have an opportunity to not be on the internet.
Exactly.
By the time you're born these days. So it's just that slow yet exponential, aggressive expansion of adoption of Bitcoin and understanding Bitcoin. So with investors, especially on the institutional side, we've seen a massive inflow this year. And it's funny because even with the Wall Street investments coming in, they're really kind of only looking at the power assets. After in June, CoreWeave and Core Scientific, they struck a deal where Core Scientific basically providing massive amounts of power and data center computing power for their HPC AI needs. And then as soon as that happened, clients were just getting non-deal roadshows. They were getting incoming, inbound calls from some of the largest investment firms in the world.
Amazing.
Because they saw the power part. And it's funny because they still don't really appreciate the Bitcoin part. And I think now, once they see what these BTC miners, and that's kind of our primary public company work we do is with the Bitcoin mining companies. They see the power of Bitcoin and the power of the profit that you can mine Bitcoin when it's at these levels. I'm actually just watching the chart here next to me. So I think I mentioned it before, but if I squeal, it means we broke 100K. But
if that happens during this episode, that would be so incredible. I feel like we would have to publish it right away. That is a Thanksgiving special. So
Thanksgiving special.
I love it. We'll see what happens. Keep your eye on it, please. Let us know.
Yeah, I will. But yeah, so it's still trying to just kind of, it's, the phrase orange pill, which is where you introduce someone to Bitcoin and then you get them to understand it and then you kind of get them fully bought in. So you're trying to orange pill these institutional investors. And then, now that they see this Bitcoin cycle running where it is now and to hopefully, even higher levels here in the next 6 to 9 months, I think they'll start to appreciate it a little more and see that it kind of is a viable revenue stream for some of these companies too.
Very interesting. One other thing that I do want to talk about with regard to Bitcoin miners and any other client that you have, I've noticed some of your clients are pre-IPO, they're about to IPO, they're more mature within their life cycle. How does Orange Group pick their clients? So how do you know which client to work with and at what stage?
It's interesting because we had a lot of relationships, at least UGA had a lot of relationships already with some of the public companies and the public miners. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of our first, and our first big chunk of revenue for our business was working with some of these publicly traded Bitcoin miners. As we expanded, we also have a really close relationship with another private client, that they're kind of in discussions thinking about pre-IPO and on that route and that journey. But there's a lot of nuanced kind of branching out services that we can provide too. UG is a CPA. I've done fractional CFO work for a few years now. And just the accounting alone for having any sort of Bitcoin transactions on your books, it's changed in the favor of Bitcoin companies more recently, but it's still just quite a bit of nuance onto how to report and how to use things. So, companies that are pre-IPO or even if they're seed or, Series A, whatever it is, we can still advise a lot of what we think is obviously good advice, but, we can still advise them on what to do, how to approach it, what steps need to be taken if they want to ultimately go IPO. And then also, we've made a lot of good relationships with a lot of buy-side funds in the space. So, we can set up calls, we can set up meetings with some of these private guys, with some of these bigger funds to, let them kind of pick their brains and see if it's kind of a viable investment down the road.
Interesting. And we've had a few IR professionals that have been on the podcast so far, and they're not technically or really in Bitcoin at all. So I know for them, managing investor expectations was something that came up quite a few times. It's like, if you have a certain company that needs to hit on XYZ milestone, how are you managing those expectations? I wonder how it is with Bitcoin. Wouldn't it be a little bit more difficult to communicate that with investors? How do you set those realistic expectations with investors, whether institutional or retail, for your clients?
Yeah, that's a good question. One of the bigger things, at least for our public clients, is kind of where their rubber meets the road is exahash expansion and power assets. One of the big things, there's not much guidance because Bitcoin price is always so volatile. You know what I mean? I mean, as excited as I am for it to hit 100K, will it hit 80K or 75K in the next 2 weeks? Probably. So it's just kind of like those little milestones. So you can't really give sort of guidance on what your revenue streams are going to look like, but you can give guidance on how much like computing power you have. And that's kind of been the real narrative that we've seen across the Bitcoin miners this last, 6 to 9 months, is a lot of retail investors, which it was primarily only retail investors before institutions started coming in, and 4 or 5 months ago. They're all looking at what are they doing to grow the business by expanding new data centers, buying new machines, installing new hash rate, and ultimately being able to achieve, a greater percentage of that total global hash rate. So that's the kind of their growth policy, and now with the power assets coming into play a lot more, especially with institutions, a lot of our clients are kind of dabbling in some of the HPC AI power computing. So now it's almost kind of shifting the narrative, but also still maintaining the narrative of Bitcoin, but saying like, oh, but look at all these power assets we have. We can also answer some of these hyperscaler demands to basically just plug in racks and racks of NVIDIA GPUs to ultimately outsource that revenue, which is not financial advice, a stronger guaranteed, which you never want to say guaranteed, but guaranteed revenue stream for HPC AI versus your Bitcoin, because, you're mining at 65K and you're making, 20K a coin, but then you're mining at 95K and you're making 65K a coin. So it's been really interesting the last 5 months, especially since that CoreWeave and Core Scientific deal was announced. So
that is super interesting. Cody, I want to pivot really fast and talk about Cody and Cody's day-to-day. Can you give us some behind the scenes of what goes on your day-to-day when you're working with clients?
Yeah. A lot of day-to-day really is just kind of maintaining conversations with investors. We do a lot of like investor conferences too. So that's one of the big things, is just kind of making scheduling around that, making sure that they have all the background information on the funds that they're meeting with. One thing UG has done a great job with is developing a relationship with all the sell side analysts on Wall Street that cover Bitcoin and Bitcoin companies. So, we're in constant communication with them. The last 6 weeks have been pretty intense hours on
I was just going to ask you about that. Tell us a little bit about that. So everyone, he just came out of earnings season for his clients. Can you tell us a little bit about how that has worked out for you?
It worked out well. I mean, it's always a crunch. UG has done a really great job, especially with the work he did, at Blue Shirt and Qualcomm before that. With setting up a schedule and getting as far ahead of the game as we can. So kind of high level, this is like the real block and tackle. I think they call it IR work, which is like your bread and butter of earnings come around. You got your earnings scripts for the call. You've got the press release, which is kind of like the thing that goes out 30 minutes to an hour before the call. And then, optional, but investor presentation. So there's 3, sizable documents that we really push to get ahead of, starting with the script. You work the script into the PR, then you work the PR and the script into the presentation. As far ahead as you try to get, it still comes down to the wire. It always does. It's got to, you know what I mean? That's the definition of insanity, right? You do the same thing over and expect a different result, but it's always been down to the crunch. So down to the wire, once you get everything out, then you can have some follow-up calls with analysts, scheduling those, making sure we see people we need to see, big investors, institutional investors we need to talk to. So that was the last 6 to 8 weeks, really. But beyond that, we do a lot of kind of ad hoc financial planning and analysis. If they're doing any sort of peer comparisons amongst their peers, we can help build that. Investor presentations, we can help build those. And we do help build those, maintaining CRMs, sending out press releases. It's, arranging meetings outside of conferences, whether it be industry or actual investor conferences. It's been cool because and this is just for the public clients, obviously, but it really is like a full suite of services for everything investor related. I like that a lot because, I've been in the service industry now for, I guess, almost 20 something years. And it's the way to succeed, I think.
Absolutely. And I know some of the clients, I don't know if we could name the clients that you work on, but I know some of them and I see the results and the work that you guys are doing through these clients, and it's phenomenal. I won't ask you exactly which ones they are because I know I'm not supposed to say I'm our clients on here, so I'm not going to ask you, but I do want to ask you with regard to Bitcoin specifically. I feel like you have such a unique perspective on the industry because you get to work with all of these different clients, Bitcoin miners, people that are top of the top right now that everyone's talking about. I mean, they're on CNBC, they're on Fox, they're getting all the coverage. I just want to know from your perspective, what do you think is crucial for IR professionals to understand about Bitcoin in particular when they're communicating with investors? So like, let's say it's another person that's listening in that might have a Bitcoin miner client, or they want to get more into Bitcoin. What would you say they need to focus on the most?
It's kind of, it's not like my blanket answer, but it ends up becoming my blanket answer. It's just learn more about Bitcoin, because I think once you really kind of understand why it was created, and its perfect scarcity, and there's deflationary aspects, and it actually is a true measure of the overall value of the world, which is kind of like the only way to really put it, because it keeps up with, the price of everything else too. And it actually shows you, and it's just, it's often imitated, never duplicated. It's perfect in the way that every transaction is completely tracked and permanently, stamped on blockchain. It ultimately, it's kind of it will ultimately be that type of a system that all countries are going to take over. I mean, you see inflation is just running rampant worldwide. You know what I mean? It was, even 2 years ago, it was $250 a week for groceries for me and the family, and now it's like over 400. So
It's absolutely insane.
So that's kind of its purpose is basically it beats inflation because it actually keeps up with it correctly. And you'll have people kind of touting gold and other precious metals that actually are a better measure of value. But I mean, gold's up 10% to its all-time highs over the last 15 years, and Bitcoin's up thousands and thousands, which is kind of where the actual growth in the measure of value really goes, I think. If you want more info, or I guess to expand your knowledge and how to help your clients if they are in the Bitcoin space, it really is just learn more about Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And learn about the utility, and learn about kind of how end users are viewing it and how they want to use it and how they think they should use it, or, just kind of all aspects around that.
That's so great. And that actually leads us perfectly into another question. What trends are you, I think I know what you're going to answer, but what trends are you seeing right now in Bitcoin? And how do you think investors and the public's perception is changing about Bitcoin?
The trend is up. Let's put it that way. I mean, especially, it's insane. It really is. I mean, even, after this recent election, it was interesting to see because you did see kind of that bipartisan support coming into the election. Obviously, Trump has been much more of a crypto proponent. He went to Bitcoin Nashville and spoke. And as it was funny, on the night of the 5th, I mean, every state he won, Bitcoin was going up 2%. That's what it looked like. Yeah. And it's been a flooding of the masses. And the more you see it, and the more you don't even have to understand it, but the more you see it on CNBC, and the more the average Joe sees it on CNBC, the more they're going to not even have to believe in it, but just not be scared of it, because they're like, oh yeah, everybody's doing this now. Everybody's doing this. And the ETFs came out, right? And then that was huge because that was the real low lift way to get Bitcoin exposure for a lot of, the older generations, in their 401ks or IRAs, whatever it might be. And it was an easy way for them to get exposure. And then they can start to understand, like, oh man, look at this. You know what I mean? People keep saying this every 4 years, and oh, they had that thing called the Bitcoin halving that happened in April or whatever it was. And then all of a sudden, look, there it goes again. And you overlay the charts every 4 years after the halving, and it's almost identical. It's mathematically sound. Yes, the trend is up. The regulatory framework is very positive. Okay. I think Gensler said he's going to be stepping down as SEC chair, and he's been a huge stickler for crypto for so long. Yep. So not only are the regulatory environments improving, the mass adoption environment is improving, and the price is improving. So, it's kind of a perfect storm here of this beautiful trident of hopefully just continuing and just to spread the news.
It does sound like a perfect trifecta.
Yeah, it's like, and we're still early, which is the crazy thing, and I know you'll hear that a lot in Bitcoin space, but it's still early.
It's so interesting to see. And it does sound
Yeah.
like the perfect trifecta. And I'm going to circle back with you probably in a couple of months to see what changes. So like, let's say after January, for example, to see where everything's at, where your clients are at. But Cody, before we wrap up, do you have any final advice for professionals interested in investor relations or those looking to work within the Bitcoin industry?
Yes, I would say at least, my biggest hurdle getting into investor relations was just creative writing and overall storytelling. There is a lot of nuance in the PRs that you read, and the famous Mark Twain quote, I would have been more brief if I had more time, because it's really hard. Because for me, I'm pretty exuberant and lots of significant leads and strategic leads and, a lot of adverbs and everything like that. So just really, if you want to get into IR, if you know the finance and the capital markets a decent amount and somewhat of corporate financial structure, you really need to hone in on your writing. And I'm still working on it today. So that's been my biggest hurdle. And that's kind of the one thing I always recommend to people that want to get into IR. And if you want to get into kind of the Bitcoin space, I think it's a bit of a read, but Bitcoin Standard by Saifedean Ammous.
Oh, interesting.
It's a brilliant book because it basically tells you the entire history of value and currency and trade. And it goes through and shows all the different methods of, the francs, the gold, everything about it, all the way back to the beginning of time. And it goes to show you just kind of how, unfortunately, I was going to cuss, but I don't want to cuss. The monetary system is right now. And, especially after COVID with printing money and just money printer just running. So give it a read. It'll kind of shed a lot of light about Bitcoin and kind of what it was meant to do and what it's supposed to do for the future too. So that's a good start. And honestly, just the biggest thing is buy a little and just hold it and just watch it. And, obviously never invest more than you can afford to lose. Yeah, get a little skin in the game, start reading some tweets, follow some of these influential tweeters and hop on the train and let's enjoy the ride.
I love it. I love it. This has been one of the more interesting conversations I've had so far. I feel like every time I speak with you or Yujia, I learn so much. Every single conversation, even if it's with like a client or if it's just with you both individually or when we met in person in New York, I was like, I am becoming more and more knowledgeable about the space. So I am so thankful. Thank you so much for joining us today, Cody.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jessica, for having us and keep rocking because you guys are killing it too. So
thank you. Thank you. And for everyone tuning in, thank you so much for joining us today on Communicating Capital. For our listeners who want to connect with Cody and learn more about Orange Group or really anything about Bitcoin, feel free to DM him directly on LinkedIn. But you could also check out the show notes down below. So thank you again for tuning in. We'll see you next time.